Elton John had just finished performing at a private charity gala when he turned to Ozzy Osbourne and said something that was meant to be a joke. But what Ozzy did next left Elton in tears and revealed a secret the Prince of Darkness had kept for 40 years. It was October 19th, 2019, at the Royal Albert Hall in London. This wasn't your typical rock concert or massive public event. This was an intimate gathering for the Elton John AIDS Foundation, one of the most exclusive charity galas of the year. Only 200 people were in attendance, VIP guests, musicians, celebrities, and major donors. The atmosphere was elegant, warm, and surprisingly relaxed. Elton had recently retired from touring after his farewell Yellow Brick Road tour, and this was one of his first private performances since stepping away from the stage. The evening had been magical. Elton had performed several of his classics on the grand piano, his fingers dancing across the keys with the same mastery that had defined 5 decades of music. The audience was captivated, hanging on every note. Among those in attendance were some of the biggest names in music, but tucked away in a corner table, trying to stay out of the spotlight, sat Ozzy and Sharon Osbourne. Ozzy looked relaxed that night, wearing his signature dark glasses even indoors, his long hair pulled back. Sharon sat beside him, elegant as always, her hand occasionally resting on his. They'd been friends with Elton for over 40 years, surviving the wild days of the 70s and 80s together, watching each other battle demons and come out the other side. This wasn't about publicity or cameras. This was about old friends supporting a cause they believed in. As Elton finished his final song of the evening, the room erupted in applause. He stood, took a bow, and began chatting with the audience in that wonderfully casual way he had. He was in his element, telling stories, making people laugh. Then his eyes landed on Ozzy, and his face lit up with mischief. "Ozzy!" Elton called out, pointing across the room. "Ozzy Osbourne, ladies and gentlemen! The Prince of Bloody Darkness himself is here tonight!" The room turned to look. Ozzy waved awkwardly, clearly not wanting the attention. But Elton wasn't done. "Come up here, mate. Come on, don't be shy." Ozzy shook his head, but Elton persisted, and the crowd started encouraging him. Sharon gave him a gentle push, and reluctantly, Ozzy stood up and made his way to the front. The audience applauded as he approached the stage, that familiar shuffle in his walk, the result of years of performing and, more recently, his Parkinson's diagnosis. Elton threw his arm around Ozzy's shoulder. "You know," Elton said to the crowd, "Ozzy and I go way back. We've seen each other at our worst and our best. But there's one thing I've never seen Ozzy do." He paused for comedic effect, his eyes twinkling. "Ozzy, why don't you play us something on the piano?" The room erupted in laughter. Everyone knew Ozzy's reputation, the wild man of rock, biting heads off bats, the reality TV star who could barely work his own television remote. The idea of Ozzy Osbourne playing classical piano was absurd, and that's exactly why Elton said it. It was meant to be a light-hearted joke between old friends. But something shifted in that moment. Ozzy didn't laugh. He stood there, very still, and even through his dark glasses you could see something change in his expression. The smile faded from Elton's face as he noticed. The room went quiet. Ozzy turned to look at the grand piano, its polished black surface reflecting the chandelier lights above. His hands, usually animated when he talked, hung motionless at his sides. Then he looked back at Sharon, who was still seated at their table. Their eyes met across the room, and in that silent communication that only couples married for decades can share, something passed between them. Sharon's eyes filled with tears, and slowly, she nodded. Ozzy turned back to Elton. His voice was quiet but clear. "Actually, Elton, I think I will." The confusion in the room was palpable. Elton's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, you serious?" "Yeah," Ozzy said simply. "I am." He walked to the piano bench and sat down. His hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly, not from his Parkinson's, but from something else, something deeper. Elton stood beside the piano, no longer jovial, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The room was completely silent now. You could hear the sound of someone shifting in their seat, the clink of a glass being set down too carefully. But something in Ozzy's eyes made it clear this wasn't about proving anyone wrong. What happened in the next 60 seconds would reveal a story that Ozzy had never told publicly, a promise made to his dying mother 17 years earlier. To understand what happened next, you have to go back to Birmingham, England in the 1950s. Ozzy was born John Michael Osbourne in 1948, the fourth of 6 children in a working-class family. They lived in a tiny house on Lodge Road in Aston, one of Birmingham's poorest neighborhoods. His father Jack worked night shifts at a metal factory. His mother Lillian worked days at a car components plant. They had almost nothing. But Lillian Osbourne had a secret love: music. Classical music specifically. She would listen to the BBC radio broadcasts whenever she could, closing her eyes and letting Chopin, Beethoven, and Mozart transport her away from the factory floors and the endless struggle to feed 6 children. She'd never touched a piano in her life. They couldn't afford one. They could barely afford food. But she dreamed of it. Young John, who would later become Ozzy, knew about his mother's love for music. As a teenager in the 1960s, when he started getting into rock and roll, forming bands in garages and pubs, she supported him completely. Even when his father was skeptical, even when the neighbors complained about the noise, Lillian would defend her son. "He's got music in his soul, Jack," she'd say, "just like me." One evening in 1963, when Ozzy was 14, his mother made him a cup of tea and sat him down in their small kitchen. "John," she said, using his real name like she always did, "I want you to promise me something." "What's that, Mum?" "One day when you've made it, when you're successful, will you learn to play piano? Not for the stage, not for your fans, just for me. Just once." Ozzy had laughed, not unkindly. "Mum, I'm a rock and roller. I don't do piano." "I know," she'd said, smiling. "But one day maybe you could, for your old mum." He'd promised, the way teenagers promise their parents things they don't really think about. Then life happened. Black Sabbath exploded onto the scene. Fame, drugs, alcohol, chaos. The 1970s and 80s were a blur of tours, albums, controversies, and near-death experiences. The promise to his mother faded into the background noise of a life lived at maximum volume. Until 2002. Lillian Osbourne was diagnosed with colon cancer. By the time they caught it, it had already spread. The doctors gave her months, maybe weeks. Ozzy flew home to Birmingham immediately. He sat beside her hospital bed, this woman who had given him everything, who had believed in him when no one else did, and he felt completely helpless. One afternoon, when it was just the two of them in the hospital room, Lillian reached for his hand. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were still sharp. "Do you remember your promise, John?" she asked. For a moment, Ozzy didn't know what she meant. Then it hit him like a freight train. The kitchen table in 1963, the cup of tea, the piano. "Mum, he started, but she squeezed his hand. "It's all right, love. You've made me so proud. You've lived your dream. That's enough." But it wasn't enough for Ozzy. That night, he went home and told Sharon everything. "I need to learn piano," he said. "I need to play for her before it's too late." What happened next? Almost nobody knew about. For the next 6 weeks, while his mother fought for every day, Ozzy took secret piano lessons. He didn't tell the press. He didn't tell his kids. He barely told anyone. He worked with a private teacher, practicing for hours when he should have been resting, when his hands hurt, when his voice was shot from recording. He wasn't trying to become a concert pianist. He was trying to keep a promise. He chose one song. "Mama, I'm Coming Home," a ballad he'd written in 1991 for his album No More Tears. He'd written it about his mother, about coming back to her after years of chaos and destruction, about the unconditional love she'd always shown him. Now he was learning to play it on piano, stripping away the electric guitars and drums, leaving just the raw melody and the words. In late November 2002, Ozzy returned to the hospital. He'd arranged for a small electronic keyboard to be brought to his mother's room. The nurses helped set it up. Lillian was weak, barely conscious some days, but that afternoon she was alert. "Mum," Ozzy said, sitting at the tiny keyboard beside her bed, "I kept my promise." He played, "Mama, I'm Coming Home" for her. His technique wasn't perfect. He hit wrong notes. His timing wavered, but he played it from his heart, singing softly along with words. He'd written about her years ago. When he finished, there were tears streaming down both their faces. "That was beautiful, John," she whispered. "You kept your promise." 3 days later, Lillian Osbourne passed away peacefully in her sleep. Ozzy was holding her hand. Since that day in the hospital, Ozzy had never played piano in front of anyone. The keyboard had been packed away. It was too private, too sacred. That moment had belonged to him and his mother, and that's where it would stay. Until tonight. At the Royal Albert Hall, Ozzy placed his hands on the keys. He took a deep breath, and then he began to play. The opening notes of "Mama, I'm Coming Home" filled the elegant hall, but not the rock version everyone knew. This was something different, simpler, more vulnerable. His fingers moved across the keys with a deliberate tenderness, each note carefully placed. It wasn't technically perfect. Professionals in the room could hear the imperfections, but it was honest. It was real. Elton John stood frozen beside the piano, his hand covering his mouth. He understood now. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't about proving anything. This was about something much deeper. Ozzy played with his eyes closed, and as he did, his lips moved, forming words that the audience couldn't hear but could somehow feel. He was talking to his mother. Across the years, across the divide between life and death, he was keeping his promise again. When he reached the chorus, his voice cracked as he sang softly along. "Mama, I'm coming home, I'm coming home." The room remained in absolute silence, except for the piano and Ozzy's weathered voice. Several people in the audience were crying. Sharon had her hands pressed to her face, tears streaming between her fingers. When Ozzy played the final note, something happened that no one in that room would ever forget. He stayed seated, his hands still resting on the keys, and his shoulders began to shake. Ozzy Osbourne, the man who had survived everything rock and roll could throw at him, who had bitten the heads off bats and doves, who had been declared clinically dead and came back, who had become a legend precisely because nothing could break him, was crying. Elton immediately moved to his side, kneeling beside the piano bench and wrapping his arms around his old friend. "Ozzy," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, mate. I didn't know." Ozzy shook his head, unable to speak. Finally, he managed, "Nobody knew. That's how she wanted it. Private. Just us." Sharon rushed to the stage, and the sight of her embracing her husband while Elton held them both was something no one present would ever forget. The audience remained seated, respectful, many of them crying themselves. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something sacred. After a few moments, Sharon gently took the microphone. Her voice was steady despite the tears. "I'm sorry," she said to the guests. "Ozzy's mother, Lillian, she passed away in 2002. Before she died, Ozzy made her a promise that he would learn to play piano for her. He kept that promise, but he never played for anyone else after that, until tonight." Elton's joke, it wasn't really a joke, was it? It was meant to be. But the story doesn't end there. What Elton did next turned this private moment into something much bigger. Elton stood, took the microphone from Sharon, and faced the audience. His eyes were red, but his voice was strong. "Ladies and gentlemen, this foundation, everything we do here tonight, it's about love. It's about family. It's about keeping promises to the people who matter most. Tonight, Ozzy just showed us what that really means." He paused, looking at Ozzy, who was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief Sharon had given him. Then, Elton made an announcement that stunned everyone in the room. "I'm making a personal donation of £1 million to this foundation tonight in the name of Lillian Osbourne, and I'm designating it specifically for a new program, music education for children who can't afford instruments or lessons. Kids like Lillian never got to be. Kids who love music but don't have the means to learn." The room erupted in applause, but Elton wasn't finished. "Ozzy, your mom gave the world an incredible gift when she supported your dream. Let's give that gift to other kids." What happened next was extraordinary. Paul McCartney, who had been seated in the audience, stood up and pledged £500,000. Other musicians and donors followed. By the end of the evening, the room had collectively donated £3.5 million. The Lillian Osbourne Music Education Fund was born. Ozzy was overwhelmed. He stood shakily, Sharon supporting him, and spoke into the microphone for the first time that evening. His voice was rough, broken, but clear. "My mom, she worked in a factory her whole life. She never had anything nice, never got to do the things she dreamed of. But she gave me everything. She believed in me when I was just a stupid kid making noise in the garage." He paused, composing himself. "She would have loved this. She would have loved that her name is going to help kids learn music." Thank you, Elton. Thank you, everyone. The evening ended not with more performances, but with something more meaningful. People approached Ozzy and Sharon not for autographs or photos, but to share their own stories. Stories about promises made to parents, stories about dreams deferred, stories about the sacrifices mothers and fathers make for their children. The Prince of Darkness had become something else that night, a son honoring his mother, and everyone in that room felt it. The story could have ended there, a beautiful private moment shared among friends. But in today's world, privacy is fleeting. A few of the guests posted about the evening on social media, carefully, respectfully. They didn't share videos of Ozzy's performance out of respect, but they shared the story, and it spread. Within days, the hashtag Lillian's Legacy was trending worldwide. People shared stories about their own mothers, their own promises kept or broken. Musicians posted videos of themselves playing piano in honor of Lillian Osbourne. The response was overwhelming, but more importantly, it was genuine. This wasn't viral content for content's sake. This was a collective moment of recognition that behind every legend is a human being, and behind every human being is usually a mother who believed in them first. The Lillian Osbourne Music Education Fund, or Lillian's Music as it came to be known, launched officially 3 months later in January 2020. The program provided free instruments and lessons to children from low-income families. The response was immediate. Music schools volunteered their teachers. Instrument manufacturers donated pianos, guitars, and violins. Within the first year, despite the challenges of a global pandemic, Lillian's Music reached over 5,000 children across the UK. 6 months after that night at the Royal Albert Hall, something happened that brought Ozzy back to the piano one more time. It was the first Lillian's Music graduation recital, where 50 children who had been in the program for 6 months would perform for their families. Ozzy and Sharon were special guests, along with Elton. Among the performers was an 8-year-old girl named Emma, whose mother was a single parent working 2 jobs. Emma had shown remarkable talent, and her teacher had suggested she perform "Mama, I'm Coming Home" as her recital piece. When Ozzy heard this, he asked if he could join her. That afternoon, in a small community center in Birmingham, not far from where Ozzy had grown up, he sat beside young Emma at a piano and played the song one more time. But this time, he wasn't crying. He was smiling. Emma's tiny fingers moved confidently across the keys, and Ozzy played harmony beside her. Her mother sobbed in the audience. Sharon sobbed. Elton, ever the emotional one, was a wreck. After the performance, Elton pulled Ozzy aside. "Your mom would be so proud, Ozzy. You know that, right?" Ozzy nodded, watching Emma show off her certificate to her mother. "That joke you made back at the gala, I think it was the best thing that ever happened. She's helping kids now. All these kids. That's what she always wanted, for people to have chances she never had." Today, Lillian's Music has expanded to over 20 countries and has helped more than 50,000 children learn music. Ozzy doesn't perform the song publicly at concerts. He still won't. But every year, at the annual Elton John AIDS Foundation Gala, there's a moment set aside. The lights dim, a piano's wheeled out, and Ozzy Osbourne plays "Mama, I'm Coming Home" in honor of his mother and all the children learning music in her name. It's become a tradition, a sacred moment in an evening full of celebration. Elton John later said in an interview, "That joke, I felt terrible about it at first, but Ozzy told me something that changed how I saw it. He said, 'Elton, my mom sent you to ask me that. She wanted this to happen. She wanted to help these kids.' And you know what? I believe him." The story of that night reminds us of something important. Behind every larger-than-life figure, behind every rock legend and wild personality is someone's child, someone's son or daughter, someone who made a promise to their mother or father and carries it with them, even when the world sees only the costume and the persona. A joke meant to embarrass became a promise fulfilled, a mother honored, and thousands of children given the gift she never had. Sometimes the most powerful moments come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the Prince of Darkness shows us the brightest light. The Mitchell family from the Steve Harvey story got their soldier home. The Osbourne family gave their mother's dream to thousands. Both stories, in their own way, remind us that what really matters isn't fame or success or being known. What matters is love, promises kept, and making sure that those who believed in us first are never forgotten. Ozzy still has that small electronic keyboard from the hospital in 2002. It sits in his home studio, and sometimes when he's alone, he plays. Just for her. Just to keep the conversation going. Because some promises aren't made to be kept once, they're made to be kept forever.